It was a chilly morning at one of the busiest airports in the world. The sun had just begun to rise, casting soft golden rays over the sprawling terminals. People hurried through security checkpoints, dragging suitcases behind them, while others sat patiently at gates, scrolling on their phones or sipping coffee. Somewhere amidst this bustling chaos, a middle-aged pilot named Captain Robert Hayes prepared for his next flight. Captain Hayes was known for two things: his strict adherence to rules and his no-nonsense attitude. He prided himself on running a tight ship, ensuring everything from pre-flight checks to passenger boarding went smoothly. To him, flying wasn't just about getting people from point A to point B. It was about precision, discipline, and maintaining order. But little did he know, today would test not only his professionalism, but also his ability to adapt when faced with the unexpected. As passengers began boarding Flight 427, Captain Hayes stood near the entrance of the aircraft, clipboard in hand, scanning the crowd with practiced efficiency. Most travelers shuffled past him without incident, finding their seats quietly. However, something caught his attention: a woman seated comfortably in the VIP section near the front of the plane. She looked calm, almost serene, flipping through the pages of a book as if she owned the place. Her presence didn't immediately strike him as unusual until he glanced down at the seating chart clipped to his board. According to the manifest, that seat belonged to someone else entirely. Frowning slightly, Captain Hayes approached her. His polished black shoes clicked against the cabin floor as he walked, drawing the eyes of nearby passengers curious about what might unfold. Standing beside her row, he cleared his throat softly before speaking. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice firm yet polite. "I believe there may have been a mix-up with your seating assignment. This area is reserved exclusively for premium class passengers." The woman lowered her book slowly, revealing sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. She wore a simple yet elegant outfit, a tailored blazer paired with dark slacks, and carried herself with an air of quiet confidence. Without missing a beat, she replied, "Oh, could you please verify my ticket details?" Her tone was calm, almost amused, as though she found the situation mildly entertaining rather than frustrating. Captain Hayes hesitated for a moment. Normally, such requests were handled by ground staff, but given the circumstances, he decided to double-check himself. Pulling out his phone, he accessed the digital manifest and cross-referenced her name. Sure enough, her assigned seat was indeed located further back in economy class, not here in the luxurious VIP section reserved for high-paying customers. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he continued, his patience wearing thin, "but according to our records, your ticket doesn't grant access to this part of the plane. I'll need you to move to your designated seat so we can proceed with boarding." For a brief second, silence hung heavy between them. Then, the woman closed her book gently and placed it on the empty seat beside her. Looking up at him, she offered a small smile that somehow managed to feel both warm and challenging all at once. "Of course," she said simply. Gathering her belongings, she rose gracefully and made her way toward the rear of the plane, leaving Captain Hayes standing there with a lingering sense of unease. Something about her demeanor unsettled him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Meanwhile, whispers rippled through the cabin as other passengers watched the exchange unfold. Some sympathized with the woman, murmuring under their breath about how rude the pilot had been. Others shrugged it off, assuming she must have accidentally taken the wrong seat. Still, a few noticed the subtle strength in her movements, the way she carried herself with poise despite being asked to relocate. There was something undeniably intriguing about her, though none of them could say exactly what. Once settled into her new seat in economy class, the woman pulled out her phone and began typing furiously. Her expression remained composed, but her fingers moved quickly across the screen, sending messages that hinted at more than met the eye. What none of the passengers, or even Captain Hayes, realized was that this seemingly ordinary traveler held secrets far beyond their imagination. And those secrets were about to turn an otherwise routine flight into anything but ordinary. Back at the front of the plane, Captain Hayes tried to shake off the encounter, telling himself it was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Yet, as he returned to overseeing the boarding process, A nagging thought lingered in the back of his mind. Why had she reacted so calmly? Why hadn't she argued or complained like most passengers would have done? These questions gnawed at him, though he pushed them aside, focusing instead on ensuring the flight departed on schedule. Little did anyone aboard Flight 427 know, the events set into motion by that brief interaction would soon spiral into something far greater than any of them could anticipate. For now, however, life aboard the aircraft continued as usual, with passengers chatting idly, flight attendants distributing snacks, and Captain Hayes preparing for takeoff. But beneath the surface of normalcy, tension simmered, waiting to boil, over in ways no one could predict. And somewhere in the midst of it all sat the mysterious woman, watching silently, her presence a quiet storm ready to unleash its full force. The woman, now seated in economy class, adjusted her posture and glanced around the cabin. The seats here were noticeably tighter, the space more cramped compared to the VIP section she had been asked to leave. Yet there was no trace of frustration. On her face, only a calm resolve that seemed almost unnerving in its intensity. She placed her phone on her lap and began typing again, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. Each message she sent carried weight, though none of the passengers around her could guess what she was orchestrating. Nearby, a young mother struggled to settle her restless toddler, while an elderly man beside her fiddled with his hearing aid. Across the aisle, a businessman tapped furiously on his laptop, oblivious to the tension brewing just a few rows ahead. Life aboard the plane continued as usual for most, but the air felt charged, as if something significant was about to happen. Captain Hayes, meanwhile, tried to focus on finalizing the pre-flight procedures. He checked the fuel levels, reviewed weather reports, and communicated briefly with air traffic control. But every time he glanced toward the rear of the plane where the woman now sat, his mind wandered back to their earlier interaction. Her calm demeanor, her quiet confidence, it gnawed at him. Something about her refusal to argue or protest felt deliberate. It was as if she knew something he didn't, and the thought made him uneasy. As boarding neared completion, the flight attendants moved through the aisles, helping passengers stow their carry-on bags and ensuring everyone was buckled up. One of them approached the woman in economy class, offering a polite smile. "Is there anything I can assist you with, ma'am?" she asked, her tone warm and professional. The woman looked up from her phone and returned the smile. "No, thank you," she replied smoothly. "Everything's fine." Her voice carried a hint of reassurance, but there was also something else lurking beneath it. A quiet authority that even the flight attendant couldn't quite place. Not long after, the intercom crackled to life and Captain Hayes' steady voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are currently experiencing a slight delay due to an administrative review. Please remain seated, and we'll update you shortly." His announcement was met with groans and sighs from the passengers. Delays were never welcome, especially when people were eager to reach their destinations. The woman in economy class, however, reacted differently. She leaned back in her seat, her lips curling into the faintest of smiles. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like she was simply amused by the inconvenience. But those who knew how to read subtle cues might have noticed the glint of satisfaction in her eyes. This delay wasn't unexpected. It was exactly what she had anticipated. Minutes later, two sharply dressed individuals appeared at the entrance of the plane. They wore dark suits and carried briefcases, exuding an aura of professionalism that immediately drew attention. Passengers exchanged curious glances as the pair strode purposefully down the aisle, bypassing the rows of economy seats and heading straight toward the cockpit area. Captain Hayes, still reviewing documents, looked up in surprise as they approached. "Captain Hayes?" one of them said, extending a hand. "We're auditors from corporate headquarters. We need to conduct an immediate review of your passenger manifest and operational records." The pilot froze, his pen hovering mid-air. "An audit, right now?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Audits weren't unheard of, but they usually happened during scheduled inspections, not mid-flight, certainly not without prior notice. "May I ask what prompted this?" The auditor hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying. "It's standard protocol following certain incidents," he said vaguely. "We'll need full access to your systems and cooperation from your crew." Captain Hayes nodded slowly, though his stomach churned with unease. He gestured for them to follow him into the small galley near the front of the plane, where they could discuss matters privately. As they settled in, the auditors wasted no time pulling out laptops and requesting login credentials. The atmosphere grew tense as the reality of the situation sank in. Their flight was under scrutiny, and nobody knew why. Back in economy class, the woman observed everything from her seat. She watched the auditor's arrival with keen interest, noting how the flight attendants scrambled to assist them, and how some passengers craned their necks to catch glimpses of the unfolding drama. When the auditors disappeared into the galley with the pilot, she allowed herself a small, satisfied nod. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Curiosity rippled through the cabin as passengers speculated about the cause of the sudden audit. Some whispered theories about security threats or mechanical issues, while others shrugged it off as bureaucratic red tape. A teenage boy seated next to the woman leaned over and whispered, "Do you think something bad happened?" She turned to him with a reassuring smile. "I doubt it's anything serious," she said softly. "Sometimes these things are just routine checks." Her words were meant to soothe, but there was a knowing quality to her tone that hinted otherwise. Meanwhile, in the galley, the auditors grilled Captain Hayes about various aspects of the flight's operations. They questioned him about seating assignments, customer service protocols, and even specific interactions with passengers. At one point, one of them pulled up the seating chart and pointed to the VIP section. "Can you explain why a passenger originally seated here was relocated to economy class?" he asked, his gaze piercing. Captain Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "There was a mix-up with the seating assignment," he explained. "I instructed her to move based on the manifest." "And did you confirm her ticket details personally?" the auditor pressed. "Yes, I did," Captain Hayes admitted, his voice growing defensive. Her seat was clearly marked as economy. The auditor exchanged a glance with his colleague before jotting something down on his clipboard. "Thank you, Captain. We'll need to verify that information further." By now, sweat had begun to bead on Captain Hayes's forehead. He had always prided himself on running a flawless operation, but this audit felt like an interrogation. For the first time in years, he found himself questioning whether he had handled the situation correctly. Had he jumped to conclusions too quickly? Was there more to the story than he realized? As the minutes ticked by, the tension aboard the plane reached a fever pitch. Passengers grew restless, unsure how long the delay would last. Some complained loudly, demanding answers, while others resigned themselves to waiting. Amidst the chaos, the woman in economy class remained a picture of calm, her presence almost magnetic. She seemed to radiate quiet strength, as if she held all the cards and was simply biding her time. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the auditors emerged from the galley, their expressions unreadable. They walked briskly down the aisle, stopping only briefly to exchange a few words with the lead flight attendant. Then, to everyone's surprise, they headed directly toward the woman in economy class. When they reached her row, one of them addressed her respectfully. "Ms. Thompson," he said, inclining his head slightly, "we're ready whenever you are." Every eye in the vicinity snapped toward her, including Captain Hayes's, who had followed the auditors out of the galley. The color drained from his face as realization dawned. He recognized the name. Ms. Angela Thompson wasn't just any passenger. She was the CEO of a major aviation conglomerate, responsible for overseeing dozens of airlines worldwide. And she had been traveling incognito to evaluate customer service standards firsthand. For a moment, silence enveloped the cabin. No one dared to speak as the auditors escorted Ms. Thompson to the front of the plane, leaving behind a trail of stunned faces. Captain Hayes stood frozen, his clipboard dangling uselessly from his hand. What had started as a minor seating issue had spiraled into a full-blown corporate investigation, and he was at the center of it. As the auditors began addressing the crew, explaining the scope of the review, and emphasizing the importance of treating every passenger with dignity and respect, Captain Hayes felt a wave of shame wash over him. He had underestimated Miss Thompson, dismissed her because of where she was sitting, and now he was facing the consequences. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about leadership, accountability, and humanity. As the auditors escorted Ms. Angela Thompson to the front of the plane, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Passengers craned their necks to catch a glimpse of her, some whispering excitedly while others simply stared in awe. Who was this woman, who had turned what seemed like a routine flight into something far more extraordinary? Even the flight attendants exchanged puzzled glances, unsure how to react to the sudden turn of events. Ms. Thompson walked with an air of quiet authority, her steps steady and deliberate. She carried herself with grace, yet there was an unmistakable strength in her presence that commanded respect. When she reached the galley near the cockpit, the auditors gestured for her to take a seat at the small fold-out table usually reserved for crew briefings. Captain Hayes stood nearby, his face pale and his hands clenched tightly around the edge of his clipboard. He looked as though he wanted to disappear, but instead he forced himself to meet her gaze. "Captain Hayes," Ms. Thompson began, her voice calm but firm. "Allow me to introduce myself properly. I am Angela Thompson, CEO of Global Airways Consortium." She paused briefly, letting the weight of her words sink in. "I've been traveling incognito to evaluate customer service standards across our partner airlines. Unfortunately, my experience today has highlighted several areas where improvements are needed." The pilot's jaw dropped slightly, though. He quickly recovered, straightening his posture as if trying to regain some semblance of control. "Ms. Thompson," he stammered, I wasn't aware of your identity. If I had known—" She raised a hand, gently cutting him off. "It's not about who I am," she said, her tone measured but kind. "It's about how we treat every way. Single passenger, regardless of their appearance or assigned seat. My goal isn't to embarrass anyone, it's to ensure that our customers feel valued and respected at all times." Her words struck a chord, not just with Captain Hayes but also with the flight attendants and auditors gathered around them. One of the younger attendants nodded thoughtfully, recalling instances when passengers had been treated poorly due to misunderstandings or assumptions. Another glanced guiltily at the floor, remembering a time she hadn't gone out of her way to assist someone because they didn't seem important enough. Ms. Thompson continued, her expression softening as she leaned forward slightly. "Let me share something with you," she said, addressing the group. "When I first started in this industry, I faced discrimination on multiple occasions. People doubted my abilities because of my gender, my race, and my background. But I refused to let those challenges define me. Instead, I worked harder, learned more, and eventually rose to where I am today. And now, as CEO, one of my top priorities is ensuring that no one else feels marginalized or dismissed. Not by our policies, not by our staff, and certainly not during their travels." Her story resonated deeply with everyone present. For Captain Hayes, it hit particularly close to home. He thought back to earlier in the day when he had assumed the woman in the VIP section didn't belong there simply because her name wasn't listed on the manifest. He hadn't taken the time to listen or consider alternative explanations. Instead, he had acted impulsively, prioritizing protocol over empathy. "I understand that rules are important," Ms. Thompson added, breaking the silence. "But so is humanity. We must find a balance between enforcing guidelines and treating people with kindness and understanding. That's why audits like this are necessary. They help us identify gaps in our processes and remind us of the values we should uphold." At this point, the auditors opened their laptops and began presenting their findings. They revealed inconsistencies in training protocols, noting that many employees received minimal instruction on cultural sensitivity and conflict resolution. They also pointed out lapses in communication between ground staff and flight crews, which often led to confusion during boarding and seating assignments. Each revelation painted a troubling picture of systemic issues within the airline's operations. Captain Hayes listened intently, his initial defensiveness giving way to genuine concern. He realized that this wasn't just about him, it was about creating a better experience for everyone involved. As the discussion progressed, he found himself nodding along, agreeing with the suggestions being proposed. Training programs would be revamped, feedback mechanisms improved, and accountability measures strengthened. It was clear that change was needed, and he wanted to be part of it. By the end of the meeting, the mood had shifted once again. What had begun as tension and uncertainty transformed into collaboration and determination. The flight attendants expressed enthusiasm for the upcoming reforms, eager to contribute to a more inclusive environment. Even Captain Hayes, though humbled by the experience, felt a renewed sense of purpose. He volunteered to lead workshops on cultural sensitivity, sharing his own journey of growth with fellow employees. Before concluding the session, Ms. Thompson addressed the group one final time. "Thank you for your cooperation and willingness to learn," she said warmly. "Remember, leadership isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Together we can make meaningful changes that benefit not only our company, but also the thousands of passengers who trust us with their journeys." With that, the auditors packed up their equipment, and Ms. Thompson returned to her seat in economy class. Though she could have easily moved back to the VIP section, she chose to stay where she was, sending a powerful message about humility and solidarity. Passengers watched her go, their admiration evident in their expressions. Some even applauded softly, earning smiles from the flight attendants. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Captain Hayes took a deep breath and made another announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience during the delay. I'd like to personally apologize for any inconvenience caused earlier. Please know that we're committed to providing you with the best possible service moving forward. Thank you for flying with us." His words were met with scattered applause and nods of approval. For the first time since boarding, the cabin felt lighter, filled with a sense of hope and possibility. Passengers settled into their seats, chatting animatedly about the morning's events. Many speculated about Ms. Thompson's role in the audit, marveling at her poise and leadership. Others reflected on their own experiences with customer service, wondering if similar changes could be implemented elsewhere. Meanwhile, Ms. Thompson sat quietly in her seat, observing the transformation unfolding around her. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Change rarely was. But she believed in the power of collective effort. By holding her company accountable, she had sparked a chain reaction that would ripple far beyond this single flight. And as the plane soared into the sky, leaving the chaos of the airport behind, she allowed herself a small smile. This was only the beginning. The plane soared high above the clouds, its engines humming steadily as sunlight streamed through the windows. For most passengers, the excitement of the morning's events had begun to fade, replaced by the quiet monotony of a long flight. Magazines rustled, headphones clicked on, and conversations dwindled into murmurs. Yet beneath this surface calm, the ripple effects of Ms. Angela Thompson's intervention continued to spread throughout the cabin. Captain Hayes sat in the cockpit, staring at the endless expanse of blue sky ahead. His hands rested lightly on the controls, but his mind was elsewhere. He replayed the morning's interactions over and over again. The initial confrontation with Ms. Thompson, the shock of realizing who she was, and the humbling audit that followed. Each memory brought a fresh wave of discomfort, but also clarity. He couldn't deny that he had acted too hastily, allowing assumptions to cloud his judgment. What if every passenger carried a story as compelling as hers? What if each one deserved not just professionalism, but genuine care? Determined to make amends, Captain Hayes decided to take action. After consulting briefly with the lead flight attendant, he picked up the intercom microphone once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but sincere. "I'd like to thank you again for your patience earlier today. As part of our commitment to improving your experience, we'll be serving complimentary refreshments shortly. Additionally, I want to personally invite any feedback you may have about our service. It truly matters to us." His announcement earned appreciative nods from several passengers. A businessman in first class raised his glass of orange juice in acknowledgement, while a young mother smiled gratefully as a flight attendant handed her a snack for her toddler. Even those seated in economy class seemed touched by the gesture, their earlier frustrations melting away. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere aboard the plane shifted from tension to warmth. Meanwhile, Miss Thompson remained in her seat near the rear of the aircraft, observing everything with keen interest. She noticed how the flight attendants moved, with renewed energy, offering assistance proactively and engaging passengers with genuine smiles. It was clear that the audit had sparked something, a collective desire to do better. Still, she knew that real change wouldn't happen overnight. Transforming an entire organization required consistent effort, transparency, and accountability. As the hours passed, the auditors returned to the galley to debrief with Captain Hayes and the cabin crew. They reviewed additional findings, highlighting areas where improvements could be made, not just in customer service but also in operational efficiency and employee morale. One key issue they emphasized was communication. Too often, miscommunication between departments led to errors like the seating mix-up that had triggered the day's events. To address this, they recommended implementing a centralized system where all passenger information could be accessed in real time, reducing the likelihood of future mistakes. The conversation then turned to training programs. The auditors suggested incorporating workshops on cultural sensitivity, conflict resolution, and emotional intelligence into the airline's curriculum. These sessions would not only equip employees with practical skills, but also reinforce the importance of treating every individual with dignity and respect. Captain Hayes listened intently, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. By the end of the discussion, he felt inspired rather than defeated, eager to play a role in driving these changes forward. For the flight attendants, the audit provided a wake-up call. Many admitted privately that they sometimes fell into the trap of judging passengers based on appearances or behavior. We get so caught up in following procedures, one attendant confessed during a break, that we forget why we're here, to serve people. Another nodded in agreement, adding, Ms. Thompson reminded me that everyone has value no matter where they're sitting. Word of the audit spread quickly among the passengers as well. Social media buzzed with updates from travelers sharing their experiences. Some posted photos of Ms. Thompson tagging her company and praising her leadership. Others recounted the details of the incident, marveling at how a simple seating dispute had escalated into a full-blown review. Hashtags like "Place Every Seat Matters" and "Fly with Respect" began trending, sparking debates about privilege, professionalism, and equality in air travel. Back in economy class, a teenage boy leaned over to Ms. Thompson and shyly asked, "Are you really the CEO?" She chuckled softly and replied, "Yes, I am. Why do you ask?" "Well," he said, fidgeting with his phone, "you didn't act like one earlier. You were just normal." Her smile widened at his comment. "That's exactly the point," she explained gently. "Leadership isn't about titles or fancy suits. It's about listening, understanding, and making decisions that benefit everyone, not just a select few." The boy nodded thoughtfully, before returning to his seat, clearly impressed. Moments later, a middle-aged woman approached Ms. Thompson hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said, "but I wanted to thank you for what you did today. I've been treated poorly on flights before because of my accent and the way I dress. Seeing someone stand up for fairness means a lot." Ms. Thompson reached out and placed a reassuring hand on the woman's arm. "Thank you for speaking up," she replied. "Stories like yours remind me why this work is so important. Together we can create a world where everyone feels welcome no matter where they come from." By the time the plane began its descent, the mood aboard Flight 427 had transformed completely. Passengers chatted animatedly, swapping stories and exchanging contact information. Several even approached Captain Hayes to commend him for his openness and willingness to learn. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong," one elderly gentleman said kindly. "You're setting a great example for the rest of us." When the wheels touched down at their destination, applause erupted spontaneously throughout the cabin. It wasn't the usual polite clapping reserved for safe landings. It was heartfelt, enthusiastic, and filled with gratitude. As passengers disembarked, many stopped to shake hands with the crew, thanking them for turning what could have been a frustrating experience into something meaningful. For Captain Hayes, The journey home felt different. He reflected on the lessons he had learned, not just about customer service, but about humanity itself. He realized that leadership meant leading by example, even when it was uncomfortable. And as he watched Ms. Thompson walk confidently toward the terminal exit, surrounded by admirers and colleagues alike, he vowed to carry those lessons with him for the rest of his career. The story of Flight 427 became a turning point, not only for the individuals involved, but also for the airline as a whole. In the weeks and months that followed, sweeping reforms were implemented, from revamped training programs to improved communication systems. Employees embraced the changes enthusiastically, knowing they had the support of both their leaders and their customers. Meanwhile, Ms. Thompson's bold actions inspired other companies to prioritize inclusivity and accountability, proving that sometimes the smallest moments can spark the biggest transformations. And though the flight itself was now over, its impact would linger for the passengers, the crew, and anyone fortunate enough to hear the tale of how one woman's quiet strength changed the course of an entire industry. The aftermath of Flight 427 spread like wildfire across the aviation industry. News outlets picked up the story, painting it as a pivotal moment in modern air travel, a rare instance where corporate accountability met grassroots change. Social media was ablaze with reactions, opinions, and debates. Some praised Ms. Angela Thompson for her boldness, while others criticized her methods, questioning whether conducting an audit mid-flight was truly necessary. Despite the mixed responses, one thing was undeniable. The incident had ignited a crucial conversation about equality, respect, and the human element in customer service. For the airline, the days following the flight were a whirlwind of activity. Senior management convened emergency meetings to address the findings of the audit and develop actionable plans. Employees at every level, from ground staff to pilots, were invited to participate in brainstorming sessions aimed at fostering a culture of inclusivity. The goal wasn't just to fix what was broken, but to reimagine how the airline interacted with its passengers on a fundamental level. Captain Hayes found himself thrust into the spotlight, not as the antagonist of the story, but as a symbol of redemption. His willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and embrace change resonated deeply with colleagues and customers alike. During one particularly memorable town hall meeting, he stood before a room full of employees and shared his reflections openly. "I've been flying planes for over 2 decades, he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. But until that day, I hadn't fully understood what it means to lead, not just an aircraft, but people. That woman taught me something invaluable. Leadership is about humility, empathy, and growth." His words struck a chord, earning applause from the audience. Many employees admitted they had faced similar challenges in balancing protocol with compassion. One flight attendant recounted a time when she dismissed a passenger's complaint because they were seated in economy class, assuming their issue wasn't urgent. After hearing Ms. Thompson's message, she said, "I realized I'd let bias dictate my actions. It's not fair, and it's not who we should be." To ensure lasting change, the airline launched a campaign titled, "Every Seat Matters." The initiative focused on promoting inclusivity, improving communication, and empowering employees to go above and beyond for passengers, regardless of ticket class or background. Posters featuring diverse faces adorned airport terminals, accompanied by slogans like "Respect starts here" and "Your journey is our priority." Training modules were updated to include real-life scenarios inspired by the events of Flight 427, encouraging staff to reflect on their own biases and behaviors. Ms. Thompson, meanwhile, continued to champion the cause. She gave interviews to major news outlets, using her platform to advocate for systemic reform within the aviation industry. In one televised segment, she recounted personal stories of discrimination she had faced early in her career. "When I started out, people doubted me because of my race and gender," she explained. "They told me I didn't belong in leadership roles, but here I am today, proving them wrong. My hope is that no one else has to fight those battles alone." Her vulnerability struck a chord with viewers worldwide. Countless individuals reached out to share their own experiences of feeling marginalized during flights, whether due to language barriers, disabilities, or socioeconomic status. These testimonials reinforced the importance of initiatives like Every Seat Matters and underscored the need for ongoing dialogue. The pilot, Captain Hayes, became an unexpected ambassador for the campaign. Initially hesitant to take on such a visible role, he eventually embraced the opportunity to make amends and inspire others. He began volunteering to lead workshops on cultural sensitivity, sharing his journey of self-reflection with fellow employees. His transformation served as proof that even those in positions of authority could learn and evolve. Colleagues admired his honesty and dedication, often approaching him after sessions to express gratitude for his leadership. One particularly moving moment occurred during a workshop held at a regional hub. A young co-pilot approached Captain Hayes after the session, visibly emotional. "Sir," he said, his voice trembling, "I want to thank you for speaking so openly about your experience. I've made similar mistakes in the past, and I always felt too ashamed to admit them. Hearing you talk about your growth gives me hope that I can do better." Captain Hayes placed a reassuring hand on the younger man's shoulder. "We all make mistakes," he replied warmly. "What matters is what we do afterward. Use this as motivation to treat everyone with kindness and respect. It's the least we owe our passengers." As weeks turned into months, the positive effects of the campaign became evident. Passenger feedback improved significantly, with many travelers praising the airline for its renewed focus on customer care. Stories poured in from around the globe. Flight attendants going out of their way to assist elderly passengers, ground staff resolving issues promptly and courteously, and pilots taking extra time to connect with nervous flyers. Even small gestures like offering a warm smile or remembering a passenger's name made a world of difference. Social media played a key role in amplifying these successes. Passengers shared photos and videos documenting their positive experiences, tagging the airline and using hashtags like #Docky or Every Seat Matters. One viral post featured a toddler gleefully waving goodbye to a pilot who had taken the time to chat with him before departure. Another showed a flight attendant helping a visually impaired traveler navigate the aisle safely. Each story added momentum to the movement, inspiring other airlines to adopt similar practices. Yet, amidst the progress, challenges remained. Not everyone embraced the changes enthusiastically. Some veteran employees grumbled about the increased emphasis on soft skills, arguing that technical expertise should remain the top priority. Others struggled to unlearn ingrained habits, finding it difficult to adjust to the new expectations. Recognizing these obstacles, Ms. Thompson emphasized the importance of patience and persistence. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she reminded her team during a follow-up meeting. "It takes time, effort, and collaboration. But if we stay committed, we'll create something truly remarkable." By the end of the year, the airline's reputation had undergone a dramatic transformation. Once criticized for inconsistent service, it now earned accolades for its innovative approach to customer care. Industry awards rolled in, recognizing the company's efforts to prioritize inclusivity and empathy. Competitors took note, with several launching their own campaigns inspired by Every Seat Matters. Slowly but surely, the ripple effects of that single flight extended far beyond the confines of the aircraft. For Ms. Thompson, the journey was far from over. She knew that true progress required constant vigilance and a willingness to adapt. Yet as she boarded another flight months later, this time greeted warmly by staff who remembered her message, she allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. Her decision to conduct the audit on the spot may have been unconventional, but it had sparked meaningful change, not only within her organization but also across the industry. And so, what began as a tense standoff became a catalyst for lasting transformation, reminding everyone involved that leadership, empathy, and accountability go hand in hand. The legacy of Flight 427 would continue to shape the future of air travel, proving that even the smallest actions can have profound consequences. Months had passed since the events of Flight 427, but its impact lingered like a gentle breeze that refused to fade. The story of Ms. Angela Thompson's bold intervention and the subsequent transformation of the airline had become legendary, not just within the company, but across the entire aviation industry. It was a tale of accountability, humility, and the power of leadership to inspire change. For those who had lived through it, the experience remained etched in their memories, shaping how they approached their work and interacted with others. Ms. Thompson stood at the podium of an international aviation conference, her presence commanding yet approachable. Hundreds of industry professionals filled the auditorium, eager to hear her keynote speech. As she adjusted the microphone, she scanned the crowd, her eyes meeting those of familiar faces, including Captain Hayes, who sat near the front row, nodding encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "Change is never easy," she said, her voice steady and resonant. "It requires courage, vulnerability, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But if there's one thing I've learned throughout my career, it's this. Progress is possible when we prioritize people over processes." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "When I boarded Flight 427 that morning, I didn't expect to conduct an audit or spark a movement. I simply wanted to observe, to see firsthand how our customers were treated. What I discovered wasn't perfect, but it wasn't hopeless either. There were moments of brilliance alongside areas needing improvement. And isn't that true of any organization? None of us are flawless, but we all have the potential to grow." Her audience listened intently, hanging on every word. She went on to share anecdotes from the past few months, stories of employees stepping up to champion inclusivity, passengers expressing gratitude for improved service, and competitors adopting similar initiatives. Each example illustrated the ripple effects of that single flight, proving that even small actions could create waves of positive change. "But let me be clear," she added, her tone firm yet compassionate. "This journey isn't about perfection. It's about progress. We must hold ourselves accountable, not out of fear, but out of love for what we do and the people we serve. Leadership means leading by example even when it's hard. It means listening, learning, and adapting. Because at the end of the day, we're not just running businesses, we're building connections." As she concluded her speech, the room erupted into applause. People rose to their feet, cheering not only for her words but also for the vision she represented. Among them was Captain Hayes, whose journey from defensiveness to dedication had come full circle. He stepped forward after the session to thank her personally, his gratitude evident in his expression. "You've changed more than just our airline," he told her sincerely. "You've changed me. I'll carry these lessons with me for the rest of my career and beyond." Ms. Thompson smiled warmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for embracing the challenge," she replied. "Real change happens when individuals like you take ownership and lead with integrity. You're proof that anyone can grow no matter where they start." Back at the airline, the Every Seat Matters campaign continued to thrive. Employees wore badges bearing the slogan, a daily reminder of their commitment to treating every passenger with dignity and respect. Training programs evolved to include interactive modules, role-playing exercises, and guest speakers sharing diverse perspectives. Customer feedback forms highlighted improvements in nearly every aspect of the travel experience, from check-in to boarding to in-flight service. The airline also introduced new policies aimed at addressing systemic issues identified during the audit. A centralized digital platform allowed staff to access real-time updates on passenger needs, ensuring smoother communication between departments. Special accommodations were made for travelers with disabilities, language barriers, or medical conditions, reflecting a deeper understanding of individual requirements. Even minor details like offering complimentary snacks to economy class passengers during delays demonstrated a renewed focus on empathy. Beyond operational changes, the initiative fostered a sense of community among employees. Monthly town hall meetings provided a platform for open dialogue, allowing staff to voice concerns, celebrate successes, and suggest ideas for further improvement. Peer recognition programs rewarded acts of kindness and exceptional service, reinforcing the values championed by Ms. Thompson. Slowly but surely, the workplace culture shifted from transactional to transformative. Passengers noticed the difference, too. Social media buzzed with stories of heartwarming interactions and thoughtful gestures. One viral post featured a flight attendant surprising a young girl with a stuffed animal after learning it was her first time flying. Another highlighted a pilot taking extra time to explain turbulence to nervous travelers, easing their fears with patience and humor. These moments weren't scripted or staged. They were authentic expressions of care, born from a shared mission to make air travel better for everyone. For Ms. Thompson, witnessing these transformations brought a profound sense of fulfillment. She knew the road ahead would still present challenges, as no system is ever truly perfect. Yet, she took solace in knowing that the foundation had been laid, a foundation rooted in accountability, empathy, and collaboration. During a quiet moment aboard another flight, she reflected on how far they'd come. Passengers greeted her warmly, some thanking her for her efforts, while others simply expressed admiration for her leadership. Her decision to step forward that day had ignited a chain reaction, empowering countless individuals to strive for excellence. Captain Hayes, meanwhile, emerged as a role model within the industry. His workshops on cultural sensitivity became highly sought-after sessions, drawing participants from airlines around the world. He often shared his own story, the initial confrontation, the humbling realization, and the eventual growth, as a testament to the power of self-reflection. To his surprise, many attendees confided in him afterward, admitting they had faced similar struggles and felt inspired by his honesty. "I used to think being a leader meant never making mistakes," he admitted during one such session. "But now I know that true leadership means owning your mistakes and using them as opportunities to learn. If I can do it, so can you." By the end of the year, the airline earned numerous accolades, including awards for customer satisfaction, diversity and inclusion, and innovation in service delivery. Competitors praised its efforts, with several launching their own campaigns, inspired by Every Seat Matters. Industry publications hailed the initiative as a blueprint for transforming corporate culture, emphasizing the importance of putting people first. Yet, despite the accolades, Ms. Thompson remained grounded. In interviews and public appearances, she consistently redirected praise to the employees and passengers who had driven the movement forward. "This isn't about me," she often said. "It's about all of us working together to create a better future, for our customers, our colleagues, and ourselves." As the calendar turned to a new year, Ms. Thompson prepared for another flight, this time bound for a remote destination she had never visited before. Boarding the plane, she was greeted warmly by the crew, who remembered her message vividly. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Thompson," the lead flight attendant said with a smile. "We're honored to have you here." Settling into her seat, Ms. Thompson glanced around the cabin, noting the subtle signs of progress. A friendly greeting here, a helpful gesture there. Though invisible to most, these small acts represented monumental strides toward a more inclusive, compassionate industry. Closing her eyes, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. What started as a simple test of customer service standards had spiraled into something far greater, a movement that transcended borders, cultures, and industries. It reminded her of a phrase she often repeated: "Treat every passenger as if they hold the power to transform your company, because they might." And indeed they did. As the plane soared into the sky, carrying her toward new horizons, Ms. Thompson felt a deep sense of hope. The legacy of Flight 427 would continue to shape the future, inspiring generations to come. For in the end, it wasn't just about airplanes or airports, it was about humanity itself, and that she believed was worth fighting for.